You're listening to PODWOM, Podcast Without Measure, the podcast edition of the official e-zine for the International Size Acceptance Association. In Austin, Texas, here is your host, Alan Stedham.
Now, speaking of the early days of the International Size Acceptance Association, one of our original goals was to, work to bring size acceptance to other parts of the world. In my early dealings with the movement and with how to bring about size acceptance, I learned of size discrimination in other countries and learned of the real hunger and desire for size acceptance in other countries, places you may not expect there to be a great interest. I mean, one of the first ones was in Canada, and then in France and Sweden, Russia, Norway, and then of course I got to meet Linda Fenn from New Zealand, and eventually Jodie Hunter from Australia, and many other great people who had a desire to bring size acceptance to their country, and many of them were, sort of the founding fathers and mothers of size acceptance in their parts of the world. So it's always been important, because you have to realize in dealing with other countries, you're dealing with their cultures. The cultures are different country by country. And, how many times have we heard about, a company that does an advertising campaign that just goes completely wrong? Not the way that they intended, because they didn't take into account the way that the language translation just didn't make sense. I mean, the infamous Chevy no va, no go wouldn't do too well in Spanish-speaking countries. And likewise, I believe that Pepsi had an infamous Pepsi brings you back to life, except in some Asian countries, like China, I believe, it translated to brings your ancestors back from the dead. So it's real good to know what you're saying in other languages, but it's also important to understand the cultures. And one of the big challenges that ISA had a few years ago was when we met someone who was interested in introducing the Middle East to size acceptance. Quite a bold step to take, in that this is a woman, this is a BBW, who had a great desire to learn how to be size accepting of herself, but then also to help others. In the process, dealing with a different culture that was distinctly Muslim culture and also Arabic culture. It's my privilege and honor to speak with Fatima Parker. Good evening, Fatima.
Oh, hello. Good evening, Alan.
So tell us a bit about what it's like to be plus-sized in the Middle East.
You mean the plus size in general, as being a plus size in the Middle East?
That is correct.
That's it. We've been going through the same problems and the same change as everywhere else in the world. But being plump was something very wanted and very admired years ago. Let's say about 30, 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. The girls who were a little bit bigger were loved and were supposed to, or were seen as being rich girls. Right. from a rich family. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you can't afford to fill up like this if you didn't have enough to eat, and if you had to work very hard and so on.
Right.
But things now are not the same. I mean, things have changed, and it's really getting worse and worse as everywhere else in the world for people of size.
What's made the change, or what are the main reasons you think that have made the changes?
It is mainly the media. It is mainly the image that we see. Mainly girls and women are bombarded by these pictures of slim, by these models, all these shows that we see, the fashion shows, mm-hmm. the beauty queens, the beauty goddesses and divas and all that. They're all very slim, and they're getting smaller and smaller. So mm-hmm. the idea of beauty is becoming smaller and the women who have been years ago to be considered beautiful, they're now unwanted and marriable. They're seen as unhealthy, and of course most of the time they're called fat and ugly, which is very sad.
Well, you've been working there since about 2002, working with the communities in the Middle East and in North Africa. How have you been received by the public?
The public there found me a bit surprising. They're not used to it, because every time, all the programs until now, actually, most of the programs that are on television and most of the articles you read in papers and in magazines, all the time they are pushing for a slimmer body, to be thin, to lose weight, and selling diets, and selling the hope and selling the idea of beautiful and healthy is being thin. So here I come with this new controversial idea, and me being large on television, telling women especially, love yourself, look after yourself, and accept being big. It's okay to be big, but as long as you look after your health and eat well and exercise. It shocked them, and so I was noticed right away. I was liked by people, by women who were thin before the fat ones.
Really?
Because the fat ones look at me and say, you must have a secret. How come you're so strong? How can you say that? We feel it, we hear it, we live it, but cannot convince ourselves and convince the people, our families and our husbands and people around us, that really we can be fat and happy and healthy.
He is the author of Hungry for More, a Keeping It Real guide for Black women's weight and body image. Now, Robyn currently works as an advisor in the Women's Studies and Behavioral Science departments at California State University, Dominguez Hills, and she frequently writes and lectures on women's issues and popular culture. Joining us from Los Angeles is Robyn McGee.
Okay, well, as you know, I wrote the book because my sister Kathy passed away as a result of weight loss surgery. 4 days after she had her gastric bypass, she passed away from the infection. So, I was devastated. My whole family was, of course. But I knew that Kathy had a problem with her weight her whole life, and I recognized that other women do too. So I wanted to take, my personal loss and find some universal truth, and maybe help another woman, another person really, that might be struggling.
That's always wonderful to take something so tragic and negative and try and turn it around for a positive for someone else. I definitely commend you for that.
I tell everybody it's been a bittersweet experience. That's the best way I can describe it.
Sure. Now, the focus on this book, it's right on the cover it says, a Keeping It Real guide for Black women on weight and body image. So what gave you the idea to focus specifically on something for African American women?
That's a good question. I'm myself African American, and I know best how we struggle with weight and health issues. So I wanted to concentrate on that, but I also wanted to present a truth that would appeal and apply to all of us.
Right, and I understand. I'm in an interracial marriage myself. My wife's African American, and so it was kind of parts were amusing to me to read, because it's like, some of it I understood and had actually seen, different attitudes and different, and then some I actually learned some from your book. So, just in terms of I would have never imagined that hair would keep someone from exercising.
Everyone asks me about that, about hair, But, it's kind of a truth that a lot of women don't want to really work out every day because they don't want to sweat out their hair or mess or weave or whatever it is. But, my question is, we need to come to a point where we can accept people for who they are. Right. Because, we have a whole generation of young women coming up of all races that have been inundated with MTV and ET and the Internet and, magazines that say, this is the ideal woman. Right. This kind of tall and slender and energetic woman that kind of, gets the guy, supposedly, in the end. And this is what young women are looking up to. Right. And, if you don't fit that image, a lot of young women, because I work at a university, as you know, so a lot of women feel they have to take drastic measures. Yes. To look like this, to get the guy. And my message to them is, first of all, further your education as best you can. And I'm not saying necessarily go to college, but just, feed your mind. Right. Absolutely. And better health will follow.
Find a way to get my message and my faith and the hope of the message that if God can do this in my life, or if I can accomplish what I've accomplished, that anyone can accomplish, no matter what your insecurity is, no matter what's holding you back. So going into the schools, actually the book is a great tool to get into the schools because so many kids deal with the self-esteem issues, and because right now in America we have such an epidemic of childhood obesity and of the eating disorders and so many things. So going into the schools, I can just say, look, I've been low and I've been your age and I've been exactly where you are, and now I'm just 21. So it hasn't been long since I was just a kid in school, and look what I've accomplished just by just believing in myself. And and a lot of it, I always give God the credit, but a lot of it is also me just saying, okay, I'm going to just step out and do it.
Right.
You can have every opportunity in the world, but if you don't, walk through the door, you're not going to get somewhere. So just saying, I'm scared to death sometimes to stand up and do things, but I do them anyway.
That's really one of the hardest things. There's so much information and misinformation out there, and that was really when I did my book. One of my big passions was to provide a source, of, that people can actually trust. And so what I saw is a lot of, again, you mentioned these health and fitness gurus and stuff like that. And I'm very critical of diet books and all kinds of things, so I would read this stuff, and it's just incredible that a lot of times they just make up whatever they want.
Right.
So I made sure that before anything was in the book, everything was researched, documented, so to provide something that people could trust, because that was the audience I was really writing to, was people that have tried everything, they've placed their hope and faith and trust in all kinds of products. We spend over $33 billion a year on health and weight loss products, yet we lead the world in obesity. So it was really reaching out for people to give them something that they could place their faith and trust in and not be disappointed once again.
How can people distinguish between the high body fat as opposed to, the actual physical weight or the appearance of the person? What do you find leads, especially with like the celebrities or the different people, what leads to that higher fat content even though their weight may be lower?
And you know what that is? It's years of dieting, because what happens is, again, people focus on the scale, and so what happens is you do these starvation diets and just going about it improperly, you really your body is actually trying to survive, and it's fighting you. And so you actually begin to lose lean muscle tissue, which actually keeps your metabolism higher, allows you to be healthier, stronger, and so you begin to lose that for the sake of getting a number on a scale a little bit lower, which is just ridiculous.
Right.
But you lose that weight, and then what you're left with is just basically, people that are skinny fat. It's bone and skin and body fat, and they've lost most of their lean muscle tissue. And studies are actually indicating that oftentimes that it can come from organs as well, where you can damage heart tissue because your body's literally trying to break down lean tissue to get what the body needs, particularly the brain. So you're basically eating yourself from inside out for the sake of a number on a scale.
I talk about puberty as being a time when girls gain, an average of 25 pounds. Can you imagine continually sending that message that they need to get away from any weight gain, that they should be a skinny girl, and then here they are, weighing themselves or comparing themselves to the other girls in the class, the other boys in the class, and they're very unhappy with themselves because they're going against what the messages tell them, which is fat is bad, and now you're gaining weight, and weight is equated with getting fat.
Right. And it almost is like I truly believe that the social non-acceptance is actually a greater influence than any concerns about health. It's the fact that they're not accepted, is the real factor there. Even though they're willing to do so many things that are unhealthy to be socially acceptable. And to me, that is such a good point, and I talk about that too, because when people tell me, they'll say, but Dr. Robyn, aren't you promoting, these people being, really, really big and eating unhealthy? And that is ridiculous. Yep.
I am not promoting people to eat unhealthily. What I'm saying is that we should, we need to accept ourselves the way that we are, that we need to love ourselves the way that we are, and that everybody, regardless of size or weight, should be eating in a healthy manner, should be active if they can be, should be getting enough sleep, should be blowing off stress, because these are things that are healthy for everyone.
Right.
If you're telling me that you're unhappy because your daughter is, say, a size 16, and throw anything out there, and she's eating, Cheetos for breakfast and ring dings for lunch, then it really doesn't matter that she's a size 16, because the same thing, if she was a size 2, is still unhealthy.
Yep.
You shouldn't be eating Cheetos for breakfast and ring dings for lunch. There's nutritional components you need to be eating. So it's not a size thing.
No.
That is related to health. And when we say that it's about weight, then the girl who does eat Cheetos for breakfast and nothing else for the rest of the day, and she remains really thin, is that okay? No.
Nope.
You can't make it about weight.
Exactly. It's interesting. We get the same criticism as a size acceptance organization that you get for promoting,
Positive body image, yeah.
Exactly. But I think it just it emphasizes two things. It emphasizes the cultural disconnect, and it emphasizes the fact that it's entirely visual. It doesn't matter that this girl may be athletic, she may be the healthiest person in her class, she just happens to be a size 16. It's the fact that she looks bigger than the rest, but isn't that just the essence of discrimination? Because discrimination...
And I think you're right, because then we're sending the message, all right, you're a size 16, therefore you're too big, and yes, you're healthy and active, you're eating a healthy foods, you're eating a wide array of foods, you're active, you're getting enough sleep, you're blowing off stress, but you're a size 16, therefore you now need to change what you're doing and do unhealthy things in order to be smaller. This is a ridiculous idea.
Let's give ahead to you reprising your role as Mr. Spock in the new Star Trek movie.
Right.
I try not to give too many spoilers for our listeners. We still want them to see the film, but needless to say, your role was quite extensive. What led you to become involved? The script or something else?
I was contacted by the director, J.J. Abrams. I had a meeting with he and his writers, Robert Orsi and Alice Kurtzman. We had a very intense conversation about what Star Trek was all about, what Mr. Spock was all about. Spock character had been marginalized for some time during the former regime, the people who were making the Next Generation series and all those other series that followed the original had marginalized Spock, and that was okay with me. I had gone off and done a lot of other different kinds of work, but here these people came and led me to understand that they really appreciated what the original Star Trek was about and what the Spock character was about. And they wanted to tell a story in which Spock would play be an important factor. I was actually really quite touched by their sincerity and their understanding of what Spock had contributed to Star Trek. I agreed that I would at least be interested enough to read their script when it was done. And they went ahead with that understanding, and they wrote the script. When I got it, I was quite pleased with it, and I contacted Mr. Abrams and I told him that I would act in the film.
Had you met or worked with any of the cast before?
No, I didn't know any of the cast. I had not met Chris Pine, or Zachary Quinto, or Winona Ryder, or Ben Cross, or Carl Urban, Eric Bana. No, I didn't know any of them. Was the first time for me.
So was it like working with so many new faces, playing Kirk, Corey, Scotty?
Well, I felt like the old timer who shows up and the young people in the cast were appropriately intimidated. They're wonderful people. They're all very talented. I enjoyed working with each and every one of them. I admire what they have accomplished. I've been asked a lot about my opinion of Zachary Quinto. I think he's an extremely intelligent and talented gentleman, looks enough like me to make the connection, and more important, he has a lot of craft and intelligence, and I think his performance is excellent.
I would agree. I saw the movie, and I very much enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Now, you've written books on this subject, but right here, right now, for our listeners, will a part of you always be Spock? And what does that mean to you?
Oh, there's no question about it. There's no question about it. There's no escaping that, and not that I want to. But there's no question that would be my strongest identification, would be with the Spock character. It has been a blessing to me in that since Star Trek went on the air in 1966, I have never needed to worry about finding a job. I've always had places where I could go and work, in the theater and the television and the films, and all over the United States and a number of foreign countries as well. So I've been able to make a living as an actor for all these years, which is I consider a blessing. And I'm very grateful for all the opportunities that Star Trek and Mr. Spock have given me.
wonderful. You've done numerous voice acting and voiceover roles in animated
Right.
movies in recent years.
Right.
What do you consider before agreeing to a voiceover part? Does it pose any unique challenges that differ from other forms of acting?
Well, I read the script to look for the acting opportunity. What opportunity does it offer me, and how will I approach this role? Is this something that I think I can do creatively and successfully? Usually, I would say most of the time when I'm offered a particular voiceover role, it is because the people know my voice and know the kind of persona that my voice projects, and they have gone through their own casting ideas, and very often they're right. There's a role there that I can manage. I haven't been asked to do voices of characters or creatures that are so outside my range that I have to say no, I can't do that. It's unlikely that I would be offered that kind of a role.
I understand. A few months ago, I listened to your recording of Too Young for Yiddish.
Yes.
And, I really appreciated the warmth and the personality that you gave to Richard Mickelson's story. Please tell our listeners about it.
Well, the book is a lovely book. Rich Michelson, the author, is a very good friend of mine. He also happens to operate a very good gallery, an art gallery in Northampton, Massachusetts, where he shows my work, and that was the connection. But he's an award-winning poet and writer. I admire his writing, I admire his work, and I was moved by the content of that book. I think it's a very good one, and I was very flattered and honored to be asked to do the voice.
And what's the number one thing you'd like people to know about you that perhaps is not something commonly known?
Well, after all these years as a public person, I don't think there's an awful lot that people don't know about me. And I have always tried to find my way in the arts. It's sometimes challenging. It's sometimes surprisingly exciting, and sometimes surprisingly disappointing. But that's the way it is in the arts. It is not a clear-cut scientific process. You operate in the dark a lot of the time looking... I've said sometimes that starting out on an artistic project is like entering a dark room where there are holes in the floor, and somewhere in that room there's a light switch, and you have to find that light switch to illuminate the place. And obviously there are dangers involved because of the holes in the floor, and there's a great excitement in the expectation that you might find the switch. And when you do find the switch and turn the light on, there's great satisfaction. That's what the artistic process is all about.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
You're very, very welcome. I'm sorry it took so long to get back to you, but it's been a little hectic, with the film and the other work and so forth, but I'm delighted to be able to get this done.